Hey, it's DB Velocity here, and this video is going to be a deep dive into the Rossum Electro-Music Mob of Emus. Great name choice, by the way. I'll try to summarize all of the key points, and then I'll get into some patch examples that exploit the Polyfunctional Harmonic Sextet, but it's a lot to cover, so you can jump to the chapters provided below. So let's get digging as it's time to explore. We begin with the idea of either being in a hex mode or just having the individual channels. I want to point that out as there are indeed some slight differences here, and I'll get into that later. I think it's good to start by deciding how you want to use this module in a given patch, either individual functions or a sextet with related settings. It's quite flexible in its mission, so let's see what it is on each channel. So the channels can be audio, modulation, or sequencing, and essentially any mix of that. There's a crazy spectrum of frequency range listed too when combined with all parameters and modifiers. The lowest frequency can be 36.4 hours per cycle, while the highest can go just over 23 kilohertz. That's impressive and very flexible for an oscillator that can also be a pattern generator. So let's look at the structure setup. We begin with the tap trig button and jack, and you can think of this as a tap tempo function, or it can trigger all 6 channels. It states in the manual that selecting channels sequentially and clicking the tap trig button for each is a quick way to set up the frequencies of the different channels. So let's do that. You select the channel and then tap a tempo. And then the next channel, if you just hold it for a second, it will deselect others while selecting the held channel, as multiple can be selected here. So we can single a channel and then click in another tempo. So that's easy enough. Now to execute a hex trigger, which will trigger or phase reset all channels, which is really the same thing but is contextual to what the channels are programmed for, we do this by holding the option button and then simply pressing the tap trig. And I can also latch the option mode by pressing the hex button and then doing the same, press up the tap trig to trigger all 6. And then exiting the option mode is a simple press of the hex again. The associated jack below can function in one of 3 modes. We have hex mode frequency, which affects the rate of all channels, yet allowing for phase misalignment. Then there's hex trigger, which we just covered but doesn't affect the frequency or rate of our channels. And then there's both simultaneously, which is the default and is good for clock sync and keeping everything phase synchronized. Below that, we have the CV inputs, accepting signals of plus or minus 5 volts and operate in one of 6 modes. This is currently a global setting for all channels. They are labeled and selected with the preset buttons when in option 2 mode, which is accessed with a double click and hold of the option button. And again, this is easily latched and unlatched via the hex button. And we can see a light chase occurring on the presets to cue us that we're in CV selection mode. So for frequency, we get volt per octave for all the channels independently, which is perfect for doing chords. And then trig, as it implies, you trigger them individually. Gain is simple attenuation control of the amplitude. Wave is CV over the wave shape of each channel, which works only in the current bank selected for each channel and excludes the special ninth shape, but more on that later. And then we have quantize, which will quantize external signals using the scales selected with the quantization parameter. And then for multi, it's essentially for hex mode, affecting all the channels, and each input's target parameter is labeled on the panel. With the real-time controls, we see 8 knobs. You have a primary mode labeled in black, with option modes labeled in blue. Functions labeled in orange are available in hex mode only. So let's cover what the knobs do for the individual channels. We begin with frequency, setting a base frequency of plus or minus 2 octaves, with option mode 1 being a fine tune and option 2 constraining to the semitones. Then we have octave, which selects a range of plus or minus 5 octaves, with option 1 doubling this range to plus or minus 10 octaves. Next is the wave shape selection, with option 1 being the second bank, which is mostly comprised of envelopes, and option 2 is comprised mostly of rhythm patterns. So let's discuss that a bit now, as each bank has that 9th wave that is apart from the others, and when CV is in wave mode, you cannot select that 9th shape. So for bank 1, it's sample and hold. In bank 2, it's smooth random voltage. And within bank 3, it's filtered noise. If you have manually selected any of the 3/9 waves, CV modulation of this does nothing. Now we see next is phase, setting the phase offset from 0 to 360 degrees. There are small dead zones at 90 degrees, 180, and 270 degrees to make it easy to set up quadrature LFOs. Then option 1 enables hard sync with channel 1 as the master. Option 2 sets a channel to one-shot mode. So these two options are essentially two position switches, so turning past 12 o'clock will toggle it on, and anywhere below is the option turned off. Next is the harmonic number. Now we get some more of the complex side, and you might think of this as the next stage or offset in tuning your oscillator, setting to the harmonic series in relation to the fundamental that is set with the initial frequency and octave parameters, as there are several places that affect the overall tuning and frequency range that you can achieve. Here we set a frequency multiplier of 1 to 16, and in option 1 mode we get frequency multipliers 17 through 32. So a common use here is to have all 6 channels tuned to the same frequency and octave, which is easily done when you have all channels selected with a double click of the hex button. Then you select the individual channels and change them to the harmonic number frequencies for the desired harmonic relationship. Now we move to gain, which sets the individual levels in dB from -infinity to 0 dB, and option 1 is another toggle to include or remove a channel from the summed mix output. For variation, we set the probability that a channel will ratchet or drop a step. So turning clockwise from 12 o'clock increases the chance of ratcheting, which is a simple doubling of the frequency. So at maximum, you are essentially playing at the next octave higher. Turning the knob below 12 o'clock increases the chance of dropping a step. So at full counterclockwise, you are having the channel's programmed frequency so that you get an octave below. And then we move to quantization, selecting from a pre-programmed scale that a channel's output will be quantized to, with the minimum setting being off. And then option 1 adds a random frequency variation to the output from none to a maximum amount, and option 2 adds a DC offset in plus or minus 12 semitones, useful for quickly transposing one or more channels. It's important to differentiate between this function, which quantizes the outputs of the internal channels, and the quantization CV input mode, which quantizes external signals patched in. When in quantized CV mode, the scales and DC offsets selected here affect the external quantizer, and those signals replace the internal ones. So basically, a sample and hold running into the CV will be quantized according to the scale selected and replaces the internal sample and hold if that is the selected wave shape. Now in hex mode, the controls here will offset all the channel's parameters for frequency, fine and semi, octave with the 2-time multiplier, phase, variation, and the DC offset. But the hex mode will override settings for wave shapes with the exception of selecting null, meaning you enable the individual channel's wave shapes. In individual mode, the null setting reverts to sine. Further, in hex mode, harmonic number has a different meaning and sets the number of channels playing from 1 to 6. Also, the option 1 function series lets you select from 15 pre-programmed harmonic series, instantly assigning each channel to the appropriate harmonic number. Moving on to harmonic gain, letting you control the balance of the 6 channels. At full clockwise, all channels will play at their programmed levels. As you turn the knob counterclockwise from there, variable slope attenuation will be applied, more for the higher numbered oscillators and less for the lower numbered ones. So we get a nice additive synthesis structure that we can dial to taste. At the minimum setting, only channel 1 is audible. Then hex mode option 1 here sets the mix output attenuation. So basically it becomes a master level for the mix out. Another hex mode option is the warp, which warps the channel's frequencies in the style of a frequency shifter. Each channel is shifted individually, producing all kinds of swarming textures. So when the knob is at 12 o'clock, there is no warping. As the knob is turned clockwise, the channels are spread apart with the odd channels shifted lower and the even channels shifted higher. The range between 12 and 130 is designed for a chorus effect, and as the knob is turned counterclockwise from 12 o'clock, the channels are shifted closer together until they all swarm to that of the frequency of channel 1. Again, there is a small dead zone at 12 o'clock for an easy disable. For the quantize, we set the scale for the mix output quantizer, and for the random option, you set all channels on amount of random that is summed with the individual random settings, so you can get double the amount of randomization when both are set to maximum. Okay, the next area to cover is the channel selector buttons. So to edit parameters, you need a channel or more selected with a simple click. Again, we can single the selection with a hold, and we can solo a channel output with a double click, and the same to unsolo it. Thus, a double click and hold will deselect and unsolo others while soloing the one that is being accessed. Right? And you can further mute or unmute channels with the triple click. And so a triple click and hold is the same effect of unmuting others and etc. Now, the LEDs can also act as a graphical output level viewer, so when editing certain parameters like the harmonic number or, say, the quantization scale, the pot value is displayed as a temporary LED meter. So we get digits 1 through 6, with 7, 8, and 9 wrapping down from the top showing all 4 of those lit, and then the preset 1 LED will light to show the tens digit. Thus, a preset 2 and channel 1 lit would be a digit of 21, and the hex LED denotes a negative value. Also, another graphical cue is when we have no channels selected and turning a knob, we see a little half-second light chase to show us that nothing is selected for editing. So that's pretty nice. And then there's also a channel output viewer mode, which is either on when in option mode or by briefly holding the hex button, you can latch the output viewer. Doing it again or pressing option will dismiss it. Now let's cover the option modes, which are accessed by holding option for option 1 or double clicking and holding for option 2 and then turning the control. Again, we can latch it as mentioned, and then you can cycle through the tiers with each press of the option button. You'll notice the hex mode LED flashing to show which mode you are in. So the primary mode is the slower rate, and the upper tier of option 2 is the fastest. Again, we also see the preset LEDs chasing to show that a CV mode is selectable from there. Also, where the parameters only have one option, then that is the option that is accessed in this layer as well. Which brings us to the final zone of operation, which is the preset and CV mode selectors, where you load or save one of 12 presets. A simple click loads presets 1 through 6, and a double click is 7 through 12. A hold of 3 seconds is to save the preset, so saving to preset 10 is a double click and hold of that button for 3 seconds. Wow, okay, that is almost everything as far as operating and programming, and doing it a few times makes it pretty intuitive and easy to remember. Other things to note are that the knobs, when moved, will cause the parameters to jump to value of the current knob state. This is currently by design with no pass-through mode available. Also, powering down and up again will restore the last state of operation whether saved to a preset or not. A final note is that there is a utility menu that allows for initializing a preset or backing them up as WAV files and likewise restoring them. So you can indeed share your presets either in bulk or individually, and we even get a toggle for Buchla mode compatibility with that particular octave scaling. Alright, hopefully you're still with me because now I'm going to get into some patch examples. So, let's do that. For my first patch, I wanted to utilize several shapes and functions just as a proof of concept. I decided to use the mix output to control the pitch of an oscillator on channel 1. So the first step was actually to use the frequency mode for the CBNs. Then I removed all the channels from the mix out, adding only a couple back in, beginning with a vibrato style LFO on channel 2 and a quantized triangle for an up and down arpeggiator behavior on channel 3. The rates are dialed in and the gain is used to dial in the depth of modulation that is self-patched from the mix back to the oscillator CV. Then the oscillator is directly sent to a filter and simple VCA with an envelope that is fed a direct trigger from a pattern on channel 4. And then 5 is another LFO that is going to the cutoff frequency of the filter. And lastly, 6 is a pattern shape set in one-shot mode and manually triggered to control the wet signal amount on the Strymon magneto, which is at the end of my chain. So let's go ahead and have a little listen to this. And you can hear my vibrato. As I change that amount and rate. And then for the manual trigger, I can hold option and push the channel selector, or I can latch the option mode, and as long as the channel output viewer mode is on, which is toggled by holding down the hex button. As long as that is on, then I can just single press that channel selector. For this example, I will use the Quadrature LFO setup, which is conveniently preset 8, with channels 1 through 4 already configured. So I've selected those channels and adjusted the frequency range. Then I patched each one to the Befacco per call for a simple envelope VCA combo, where I have oscillator signals coming from channels 5 and 6 split among the inputs there. And so from there, I have the various outputs panned apart, and essentially 5 and 6 are just a couple of different wave shapes and they are spread an octave apart, so we can definitively hear channel 5 panning followed by channel 6. So let's have a listen to that now. So of course, this Quadrature setup can be used in many other ways, so let's further patch to some effects and get a taste of how they can be applied there. I luckily have the envelope shapeouts from Percall that are the direct result of the Quadrature triggering to send in other directions. I am sending all of those to a matrix mixer that is allowing me to just blend this into many other effects, and I have a couple of effect chains in parallel, so I'll start to bleed some of that in. And then I also have some percussion that I can bring in to show that this is all in clock sync. For this example, I'm going to use the hex feature to get a taste of some of the additive tones, and then I'll just kind of explore around and give you a sample of all of that and see where it takes us. So you see that I've got a pitch going into the frequency in multi-mode, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute and start to turn up the volume here, as this is just droning. And you can hear how the harmonic series ratios remain constant as I change the pitch. and we can explore some of the different harmonic series that are available here. So there's some of that. And I'll go back. Play with the warp a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and have a little bit of fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this through my effects chain here, and I'll turn that on now. And what I've got is some of the various channels are going again out to a matrix mixer, and then I'm feeding them around to some of my effects CVs, as well as we'll try some self-patching here. Okay, a little bit softer there. And pull the filter down a little bit. So another thing that could be done is I could use the hex mode for dialing in rhythms, and particularly polyrhythms with the harmonic series and so on. But I think you get the idea. It's a very versatile tool. So in conclusion, it's another winner for Dave Rossum and the team. They have a very unique approach to classic synthesizers, and I feel this is only going to get better. The only downsides for me are the knob jump behavior, where an option would be very welcomed for many users, I'm sure. The other minor factor is the global CV mode, as it's a potential for having truly independent channels that could be, say, envelopes triggered and oscillators pitched, and etc., which would make this a super Swiss Army knife module, so we'll have to see what the future firmwares may hold. By extension, the external quantizer CV mode is basically another form of operation currently along with the hex mode and the individual functions, as a global behavior means all channels are now waiting for a signal to quantize and do not output the internal signals. All said and done, I'm very anxious to continue exploring this, and I see myself setting up another case pretty soon just for couch-style exploration of the Rossum Electro-Music modules, which are all very skiff-friendly, by the way. I will note this is not sponsored by them, nor do I have any affiliation there. I simply enjoy the products enough that I want to share how much I love them. I think they are very forward-thinking and provide a cool paradigm for music production. So that's all for this video, and if you enjoyed this or learned anything, please show a bit of support with a like or subscribe, and please leave comments, as I really do enjoy hearing from all of you. Thank you for watching, and I wish you all the very best. Take care.